Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Revamped Founder. In this episode, we have Ashley Rudland joining us. He is the founder and he is an indie hacker and has built several products in the past, such as Indie Tools, then Create.art, Kill Spam, and many more. This is an incredible conversation. Do listen to it till the end. Thank you. So, hey Ashley, how are you?
Very good. Thank you for inviting me on.
Yep, it's my pleasure to have you on. So, before we move forward, can you introduce yourself? Give a little introduction of yourself.
Yeah, sure. So my name's Ashley Rudland. I'm an indie hacker. Started a bunch of businesses of all various types. I've been a software engineer for just short of 20 years, around 19 years. And yeah, started many things. Currently working on a product called Create, spelled CR8. Um,
Yeah,
and yeah, just documenting the journey on Twitter at the moment. Obviously, you reached out because you wanted to have a chat and talk about
yeah,
what I've done in the past, projects, etc. So yeah, happy to have the conversation.
yeah. So, when did you start with your journey of making products?
I probably my first product was probably when I was around 18 or 19 years old. I'm now 35.
Uh-huh.
Many of the products I built in my 20s never really made it to even the internet.
Yeah,
Many of them, when they did get to the internet, didn't make money. So it's a lot of failed products, a lot of false starts.
yeah,
Um, but yeah, probably when I actually started taking it serious was probably around
hmm,
2015. So my first startup, I raised a bunch of money.
yeah,
I'd had many other products before that where I dedicated all my time and investment and stuff, but that was that product I
yeah,
worked on for 4.5 years.
yeah,
And then from there, I've launched many other products since then. Currently, across all the products I've launched, I'm currently doing around $20,000 in monthly recurring revenue. Um,
hmm,
my currently new product I've launched is obviously pre-revenue, so no revenue at the
yeah.
moment. So yeah.
So, why did you start with what intention did you start making products? What's the end goal?
So I'm a software engineer, so for me it was just interesting, obviously, creating new things, but
Yeah,
that soon turned into an ambition for money and capital and being wealthy and financially free. Um, what I realized is that it's probably not the best method going out and raising money and building a classical startup to actually get
yeah,
wealthy. It's how to hit the moonshot, it's how to make hundreds of millions or billions, but your chance of success is probably less than 0.1% in my opinion. And I realized in 2019 that was the case, and I started building my own products without investment, purely bootstrapped, and that was just so much more successful, and just so much more profitable. I just earned money right
yeah,
from the beginning. um, and it's just a much better method for me. Also, I'm independently minded. I don't want to be accountable to any investors and all this kind of stuff and have to deal with them. Um, and yeah, I'd just like to do my own thing. I'm very independent, so that's why I now take this approach, which is just completely independent bootstrap businesses.
yeah. So you mentioned that you picked up money. When was that? Like in which year?
So I raised money in 2015, between 2015 and 2019. Raised about £1 million, so that's about
Yeah,
$1.3 million. And yeah, worked on a health tech startup for the
mm,
NHS in the UK.
yeah,
That what did end up being successful, but it was extremely painful, extremely stressful.
yeah,
I personally didn't make much money out of it in my own pocket,
yeah,
and since then, creating my own products, I've made a lot more money without any of the stress, to be frank. So
Mhm.
yeah, I've been
Is
doing that
that
ever since.
is that startup still alive right now?
Yeah, it is actually. Yeah, yeah, it's
Uh,
still going. Has a
but you
team.
have taken your exit.
Yeah, I sold my
Yeah. So,
shares. I sold my shares to one of the investors back in
uh,
2019. Yeah.
hmm. So, like before we talk about Crate, let's talk about this. It's pretty interesting. So, which part do you think is better? The investment part of your life or the bootstrap version? Because yeah, like you just said that it was a lot. It was stressful, but in my opinion, do you think, like this is just my opinion, that with if you raise VC money, you have a higher chance of making a bigger impact than if you try to
Yes.
bootstrap it from the start?
Yes, 100%. I think that's true. I think if you measure it based on impact, then certainly for sure. Um, Most of us deep down are really just trying to become financially free and not have to work for anyone.
Yeah,
That's most of our goals. Most people that kind of get into this space, and I think you naturally get seduced into the world of creating a
yeah,
huge impact on the world
mm,
and um, being someone of importance and status, and all of this stuff gets kind of intertwined
yeah,
into it. You have to ask yourself the question, do you want to do that? I would argue that all of us should try to do that, but I think we should do that once we're rich. I don't think we should do it the
yeah,
other way around. I think we should,
mm,
and when I say rich, I don't mean tens of millions. I mean a couple million quid,
yeah,
and a cash flow of say 10 or 20K a month. I think once you've got
mm,
that, you've got your fortress of solitude. You don't need
yeah,
anyone. You don't need anything. You have FU money. And then I think you should go and create impact on the world once you have that, because then you don't need anything. And you're coming from a position of strength instead of a
yeah,
position of weakness, which I think most of us are doing when we're raising, look at all of those startups that in the
yeah,
last few years have raised tons of capital. You'll find most of the founders are completely broke, but the startups are
mm,
worth billions. And that just
mm.
doesn't make sense to me. So that's my
So
alternative approach.
at this point of time, do you consider yourself rich?
No, because I haven't hit those numbers I just mentioned.
Okay.
I have a pretty decent portfolio, and I have a cash flow per month after all costs of around $6,000 a month. That just comes in without fail. Um, but I think I need to probably double the portfolio and double the cash flow, which I think I'll do in the next couple of years. And then at that point, I would consider myself quote unquote rich, but really financially free is how I would
Yeah.
probably refer to it. Um,
Yes, that's a pretty good point actually. I'm going to think about.
yeah, I
So
think
yeah,
I think a
go ahead.
lot I think a lot of us are I think a lot of us are operating based on programming, and that programming
Yeah.
coming from what we read, what we watch, what we consume. And I do think a lot of us have been, you know, sold a lie a little bit in the tech space, which is all of these things we've just mentioned, which is kind of creating huge impact. I don't think that it's not possible. It is possible. It's just I think there's a better path, and there's a path that probably fits most people better. Most people just want to be financially free and have a
Yeah.
family and just live a great life. They don't really want to be popular and
Yeah.
try to create the next $1 billion startup and potentially have nervous breakdowns in the process.
Mm.
And maybe have poor quality of life or poor relationship with their family and friends. We kind of all want the opposite of that. So I just think I think that's the good thing about the indie hacker movement, is I think it's a more healthy approach to business for software engineers, I would say, instead of creating your own startups. Nothing wrong with
Yeah.
doing that, but you just got to look at it honestly. And I don't think we are mostly looking at it honestly. We're typically looking at it with a rose tinted glasses, if you will.
Yeah. Everyone is like driven by something which for some people it might be fame, for some people it might be money. That I think it depends upon person to person.
Yeah, well, I think we should reject status. I think
Yeah, for sure, for sure.
you're probably aware of Naval Ravikant, I assume.
Yeah, yeah, yep,
Okay, so you know his concept of reject,
yes,
seek
yes,
wealth, not status. I think
yeah,
this concept, if the world knew that concept, I think the world would
yeah,
be very different. I think a lot of the problems in our world today are
yeah,
not driven by specifically what we're discussing here, but specifically status. If you look at politicians, if you look at celebrities, if you look at
yeah,
anyone with any decent amount of power, they're typically driven by status and they care what other people think. When you
yeah,
truly reject status, that's when you're truly free. And what you find is you
yeah,
find who you really are as a person. Because
yeah,
when you're driven by status, you're not really acting from the core of who you are. You're
yeah,
operating in a status game where you have to, it's zero sum and you have to take someone else down for you to go up in
yeah,
a sense. And when you completely reject that game, you realize you look around and everyone's playing status games, just from
yeah,
your friends and family to the people on TV to celebrities. It's a freeing thing when you really don't care about that anymore. And I think the world would be a better place if we were not driven by status.
yeah,
Um, so yeah.
yeah, for sure. Don't you think that wealth brings status, kind of, in the society right now?
It does if you tell people,
Yeah,
but I think like Naval said, he said, you know the people that are not wealthy because they're still talking. He said typically the ones that
yes,
become wealthy they disappear.
yeah,
So I'm sure if I was at a certain number
yeah,
on these metrics, these goals I have, I'm sure I probably wouldn't have the Twitter account. I think I've deleted everything else. I've deleted Instagram,
yeah,
Facebook, LinkedIn. I deleted everything. I have no kind of way back to going into consulting and things like that. I've kind of burnt
yeah,
that boat, if you will. But I think as soon as I hit those numbers, I think I probably would delete the Twitter account. I'll probably delete my website and anything
yeah,
else on the internet because, like, what's the point? Unless I have some other mission of like giving
yeah,
back or writing content that's valuable to people. But I find most people they're just turning that into a business, and there is some other ulterior motive. It's very hard to find the truth out of people these days. Typically, you have to follow the money, as you say, and that's typically driven by some kind of status game or um, thirst for the next big thing. I think
yeah,
once you're financially free, I think you should, have kids and travel the world and enjoy your life. But not everyone thinks that way, I guess. Not yet,
yeah.
anyway.
Yeah. But like you just said that you'd kind of go anonymous after you become wealthy. Is that, if that's the right way to put it? So, isn't it that your social media is what actually delivers the wealth to you?
It's just a tool. I mean,
Yeah,
I think I've seen it. So a small tangent, but definitely on topic for what you're discussing. I created a. It's not something I have in my bio, but I created a decentralized video sharing platform called DSocial. I created that in. I started on that in 2021. In late
yeah,
2022, I sold that business. I sold that to
yeah,
some cryptocurrency investors in Switzerland, and
yeah,
that business was solely started on Twitter. I started a Twitter account. I then started posting in like forums and stuff that was related to this blockchain.
yeah,
That Twitter account got like 3,500 followers.
yeah,
And the entire engagement of that product was built by that Twitter account.
mm,
That's an example where it truly works. And I actually exited it as well and sold the assets. So that's why I'm using Twitter now, because I know that if I continue down this indie hacking path, I already have, like I say, 20K coming from, well, pretty much all comes from one product. I have a product called
yeah,
dealsourcer.com that does around 20K a month in monthly recurring revenue. That business has been going
uh-huh,
since 2019. I know I can just do that again with a few more products, and probably
yeah,
sell those or keep them as cash cows if they continue to print money. So it's a tool. Twitter is a
yeah,
tool, and if you see it with Peter Levels, he has hundreds of thousands of followers, and he retweeted some stuff from me recently, and the
Yeah.
amount of traffic and engagement I got from those retweets was nuts. I
Mm-hmm.
couldn't believe. So it just shows you the power of these tools. But again, they're a tool; they're nothing else.
Yeah.
So
So the point is to diversify the income in a nutshell.
yeah, diversify the cash flow and
Yeah.
then deploy that into assets that I believe will compound at a high rate over the next 10 years. I think, yeah, I have another investment I've made recently, which is I'm building out a YouTube channel, but I'm using YouTube automation. So I'm basically
Yeah.
using agencies to build out YouTube channels, and then I own the
Mm-hmm.
YouTube channels, but I pay them to do all of the work. It's completely passive. I've just
Yeah.
started doing that. The channel's opened up about 3 days ago, so going to see how that goes this year. I think that that quote unquote business will do 3 to 5K a month cash flow by the end of the year.
Yeah.
And that's completely orthogonal to SaaS. And then
Yep.
I've obviously got this new AI product I'm working on. I
Mm-hmm.
think if I can get that to work, I think that can do a significant amount of cash flow per month. But it's much harder to make this product succeed. So that's kind of my bigger challenge. That's why it's taking my time at the moment. So yeah, diversify the cash flows, but I will aggressively be putting those cash flows into assets as the market crashes further and further. And yeah, in a couple of years, I think that will run up quite far. So yeah,
Mm-hmm. So let's move it. Let's talk about create.art. What is it?
sure. Um, is a platform to help artists use artificial
Yeah.
intelligence. So I think one of the concerns that artists have is that
Yeah.
obviously AI is going to take their jobs.
Yeah.
The idea here is to allow artists to train models on their own artwork and then be able to produce art in their own style infinitely. Now that will kind of branch out into those models being accessible to other people to use as well. So they could lease out their
Yeah.
models. They could also then sell copies, downloads of their own art, and then
Mm-hmm.
also for print as well. It's still in development. I haven't officially launched it yet. I will be launching on Product Hunt probably in a couple of weeks. So that will
Yeah.
kind of from idea to product launch, roughly 3 to 4 weeks. And
Yeah.
there will be a paid part of the product as well. So it'd be interesting to see, um, yeah, if if I can prove the concept or not. But if I don't, then I will probably give it another few weeks of testing. And if I can't get
Yeah.
much further or more engagement, then I'll drop it and I'll move on to the next product.
Mm-hmm. So how did you come up with the idea for create?
Um, I
And
came
and
up.
and, and, and sorry for the interruption. How are you gonna come up with the name? It's a pretty unique name.
Um, I can't remember exactly how I came up with the name. I was talking with a friend, and I was
Yeah.
talking about what this was after the idea had come up, and I was trying to come up with ideas for domain names, and it was just so hard to come up with an
Yeah.
idea. And then I was talking about creating art, and then I was like,
Yeah.
and then my friend was like, well, why don't you put the number 8 in there and try .com?
Yeah.
And obviously all those things were gone. And then I was like, what about .art? And they were like, yeah, that's perfect. So it kind of just organically happened on Namecheap, just trying a few ideas. But the idea, um, the idea came from another idea, which is that um, there was obviously all this stable diffusion stuff coming out, and
Yep.
I thought to myself, well, surely for blog posts,
Yeah.
you want to create an image at the top of a blog post, like a cover image. You could probably feed that into a model that could summarize the blog post, and you could feed that into a prompt, and that could create some pretty spectacular cover images. So it was like an idea for WordPress. So that was one
Yeah.
idea. And then that idea kind of forked into this other idea where I was like, well, what if you could just create any kind of artwork? And then I was
Yeah.
like, well, what about artists? And then what if you could allow artists to create? And so just it was just a conversation that just kind of I was just jamming on an idea and
Mm-hmm.
turned into another idea, turned into another idea, and then I just got really excited about it. Like for me, it was really interesting, and I've had a ton of ideas, but I haven't been interested in anything for a very long time. So it's the first idea in a long time I've been actually interested in. So I started coding on it about
Yeah.
about 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
I didn't waste any more time. I just got started and started getting people
Yeah.
using it, and yeah, people are using it now. So
That's great. So what is the average, like how many people are visiting the site on average monthly or daily basis?
so there was a spike and it's now gone down. It's roughly around 20-25 people a day at the moment. When there was some
Yeah.
tweets that went out that were retweeted by Peter Levels,
Mm-hmm.
I think I had over 1,000 people in one day using it.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I think in the last, I'm just looking at the statistics now. So I think in the last week, roughly getting a
Yeah.
few hundred page views a day. There's probably around 50 to 100 pieces of art being generated per day, something like
Mm-hmm.
that. So um, yeah, it's all over the place. The traffic is coming from everywhere. I mean, a list of countries I can't even name. There's so many.
Yeah.
So it's really surprising. I thought it would go down to zero. So I'm surprised there's still people coming to the site every day. Yeah, it's pretty
Yeah.
cool. I think when I officially launch it on Product Hunt, it'll be interesting to see
Yeah.
what happens from that point on.
So how does the like backend really work? How what have you used to build it? What like
So there's a couple things.
yeah.
Um, there's obviously stable diffusion. So stable
Yeah.
diffusion is um the kind of
Mm-hmm.
the main model, and then I'm using Dream Booth as well.
Yeah.
And then basically what I'm doing is, which I have working now, is that you can upload a bunch of images. I
Yeah.
downsize them to 512 by 512, and then I
Yeah.
feed them into the model and train them, and they kind of
Mm-hmm.
become your style for your new model. And then you can then create a new piece of art and use that model, and it will actually imitate that art. And that was kind of the first proof of concept I did before I started coding.
Yeah.
And I did that with a local artist. I think 7 pieces of art I used, and I reproduced some of their art. Not exactly the same, of course, but it was absolutely
Yeah.
in their style, and the level of detail was phenomenal. I just couldn't believe how well it worked, and yeah, so that's basically how it works. The front end is React using Next.js, running on
Yeah.
Vercel. That's kind of all the
Uh,
front end stuff in the APIs,
yeah.
and using Firebase for the database, or
Yeah.
Firestore, sorry, and
Mm-hmm.
Firebase storage just to store some of the images when they're loaded up.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so it's pretty cool.
So what if like it's just something coming from me? You build a community on top of this. So is that something that you might work on? The,
Um, I think so, but I typically think that one thing I noticed with my previous product, which was this decentralized um, video network that was built on a blockchain,
yeah.
I had a lot of inquiries for that as well. A lot of people were like, "Oh, do you want to build a community?" And I had constantly people saying, "You should create a Discord and you should do all these things."
Yeah.
I think that makes sense when it makes sense, but I don't think
Yeah.
for all products that makes sense. So I think my usual approach for most products is
Mm-hmm.
to have a handful of power users and to constantly iterate with them on ideas and improvements for the product until the product's great, and
Yeah.
then that's it. So I don't really see the value in using something like Discord or building out a community. It typically ends up being just something you have to manage and not really adding much net value to the product. But it does work. It does work in some cases. I think games, etc., things like
Yeah.
this. It makes sense.
Yeah. So uh, that's like pretty much all the questions I had. I think it was a short and trendy, interesting conversation.